Why do so many people live in conflict with themselves? I was walking unhurriedly after a long day, my coat buttoned up to my neck. The wind sliced between the buildings and made the dry leaves scatter along the sidewalk. Nothing unusual, just another early autumn evening in the city. When I turned the corner, I saw the secondhand bookstore I had passed by a few times before. The display window was dirty, full of books stacked haphazardly. But a small mirror with a golden frame stood out among it all. On impulse, and as a way to escape my responsibilities, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell of old paper and wood struck me immediately, as if the place were frozen in time. Behind the counter, the bookseller greeted me with a slight smile. He was an older man with a gray beard and an attentive gaze. "Looking for anything in particular?" he asked. I shook my head, but my eyes were already fixed on the mirror. There was something about it, hard to explain. It wasn't just my reflection. "That mirror is peculiar," said the bookseller, noticing my interest. "It's old. They say it shows not only what you are, but what you avoid seeing." I smiled, thinking it was just a sales pitch, but something inside me stirred. Without hesitation, I bought the mirror and returned to my apartment. I placed it on the living room wall between books on philosophy, old maps, and mythological figures. But every time I walked past it, a strange feeling came over me. That night, sitting on the couch with a steaming cup of tea, I looked into the mirror, and what I saw wasn't just my reflection. It was as if the mirror were a portal to something beyond what my eyes could perceive, a gateway to a world of symbols and hidden meanings. I was about to discover that sometimes the unknown is not on the other side of the mirror, but within ourselves. The following days were filled with a restlessness I couldn't explain. The mirror felt like a constant presence in the room, even when I wasn't looking directly at it. There was something in it, something that evoked memories I didn't know I had. One night I woke up with a start. The apartment was immersed in silence, but I felt a presence, a pressure in the air. My eyes turned to the mirror, where a faint mist seemed to be floating. I took a deep breath and approached it, my reflection paler than usual. "What are you afraid to see?" I even asked myself, though no answer came. There was no one there, just me and my reflection. But the face I saw seemed burdened by something dark. It was me, but not only me. I blinked again, and the fog of anxious thoughts vanished. But the question remained. What was I afraid to see in myself? What parts of my story, of my memories, were buried beyond the surface? The next morning, I decided to visit the bookstore again. The old bookseller welcomed me with the same smile. I told him what had happened, hoping for some kind of rational explanation. Sometimes, what we avoid seeing in ourselves finds a way to reveal itself, he said calmly. But don't be afraid. The shadow is just a part of you that you haven't accepted yet. The shadow. A part of me I had not yet accepted. I was only beginning to understand how deep a mirror could take me. I started avoiding the mirror and went on with my life. I left the house early, walked through the busy streets of Manhattan, immersed myself in books on philosophy and psychology, trying to distract myself. But every time I returned to the apartment, it was there, silent and imposing, like a truth I didn't want to face. On that rainy afternoon, while leafing through a book on mythology in the same bookstore, the old bookseller approached me. "Still struggling with the mirror?" he asked, as if reading my thoughts. I admitted that I was, and he gave a faint smile. "Do you know what the unconscious is? It's what you don't want to see in yourself." The days that followed were different. The mirror no longer frightened me, but held a strange fascination. Vivid dreams, living symbols. The bookseller had become my confidant. "You've begun to see, but remember, the mirror only reveals. It's up to you to interpret." The dreams became encounters, the hero, the mother, the sage. Fragments of the collective psyche. I realized it wasn't the mirror I had feared, but my own reflection. I was the mirror. That was the insight. So I sat before the mirror, now without fear. I observed my reflection, calm. Behind me, there were no more shadows, only a gentle light. I wasn't just a reflection. I was everything I had feared, rejected, and avoided. I was both the hero and the villain, the light and the shadow. The mirror was no longer a mystery, but a window into the soul. At the bookstore, the old man greeted me with a serene smile. "You've understood. The mirror never lies. But it's up to you to accept what you see." He acted like a sage of the psyche, I'd say. I walked outside, feeling the cold wind on my face, but now there was a lightness. I was no longer a stranger to myself. I could finally understand that there's more to me than the surface of my consciousness. According to Carl Jung, the human psyche is a complex structure composed of two main spheres: consciousness and the unconscious. Consciousness is the realm of perception and reflection, where the ego acts as the organizing center. It is the space where identity is formed, where thoughts, emotions, and experiences are directly perceived. The unconscious, in turn, is divided into two layers: the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. The personal unconscious contains memories, repressed experiences, and forgotten aspects that belong solely to the individual. It is the domain of traumas, memories, and complexes that shape behaviors and reactions. The distinction between consciousness and the unconscious reveals how much of the human psyche operates beyond the direct reach of perception, subtly and continuously influencing thoughts and actions. It is not enough to understand the unconscious intellectually. It must be lived, traversed, and recognized as containing fragments of one's own soul, scattered among symbols and forgotten memories. What remains hidden within us does not disappear. It merely reorganizes itself in the form of symptoms, repetitions, emotional patterns, and uncontrollable impulses. And the more we resist facing what lies at the margins of consciousness, the more we lose autonomy over ourselves. The collective unconscious, on the other hand, is a deeper layer, a psychic inheritance shared by all of humanity. It is composed of archetypes, innate and universal patterns that shape our perceptions, emotions, and behaviors. These archetypes are primordial images, present in myths, dreams, and cultural traditions around the world. Have you ever wondered why certain patterns keep repeating in your life? Or why some stories, told in different languages and cultures, seem to resonate so deeply within you? The answer may lie in the archetypes. Archetypes are universal structures that dwell within humanity's collective unconscious. Carl Jung described them as primordial images, present since the earliest times. They appear in myths, fairy tales, religions, movies, books, dreams, and most importantly, in our emotions and behaviors. They are symbolic forms that transcend generations, shaping the way we perceive the world and ourselves. Even though they are universal, archetypes manifest uniquely in each individual. They act as psychological templates, influencing our decisions, relationships, and even how we deal with internal conflicts. Ignoring the archetypes is like sailing in the dark. We are being guided by forces we don't understand, which often end up controlling us. Among the key archetypes that shape this psychic structure, 5 stand out. The first is the shadow. It represents the rejected, repressed, or hidden aspects of our personality. Everything we would rather not see in ourselves: fears, impulses, anger, shame. Ignoring the shadow means risking being controlled by it. But integrating it is the first step toward real transformation. Then, we have the anima and the animus, the archetypal images of the feminine and the masculine within each of us. Regardless of gender, we all carry qualities traditionally associated with both masculinity and femininity. Recognizing and balancing these inner aspects makes us more whole, more empathetic, and more authentic. Next is the wise old man, charged woman, an archetype I personally like to draw inspiration from. It represents inner wisdom, the knowledge that comes from deep listening and lived experience. It is the voice that guides, that observes with clarity, that does not react on impulse. The wise one does not merely seek answers, he seeks understanding, and in that quest, he leads us beyond the surface. Lastly, we find the archetype of the self, the totality of the psyche. It symbolizes the integration of all the aspects that make us who we are: light and shadow, reason and emotion, masculine and feminine. The self is the unifying center, the ultimate goal of the individuation process described by Jung. It is when we cease to be fragments and become whole. These archetypes are not abstract concepts locked in psychology books. They are living forces, expressing themselves in our dreams, in the choices we make, in the relationships we build, and in the conflicts we face. They speak to us all the time. We just have to be willing to listen. To know the archetypes is to accept the invitation to self-knowledge. It is to see what was previously unconscious. It is to take the reins of your own story with greater clarity, deeper awareness, and more humanity. Because to understand the archetypes is to begin to understand yourself. Many people live in constant conflict with themselves because they do not understand or cannot integrate the different parts that make up their psyche. The origin of this inner struggle lies in the very structure of the human mind. Consciousness is the starting point of perception. It is within consciousness that the ego is established, forming the foundation of personal identity and directing our thoughts, choices, and actions. Yet consciousness is only the tip of the iceberg, because behind it lies a vast psychic territory known as the unconscious. It is precisely there that contradictions, repressed desires, fears, traumas, and everything we cannot, or will not, acknowledge in ourselves reside. Over time, as consciousness developed, it began to distance itself from this deep inner world. Everything that did not fit the rational or socially acceptable narrative of the ideal self was rejected, repressed, and cast into the shadows of the mind. And it is precisely in this separation that inner conflict is born. Consciousness wants to maintain a coherent and controlled image of who we are, while the unconscious remains active, pulsing with the need for expression. This tension between what we show and what we hide generates anxiety, self-sabotage, repetitive patterns, a sense of emptiness, and a series of contradictory behaviors. What's curious is that even without our awareness, the unconscious continues to manifest, not only through dreams and impulses, but also through seemingly random external events that are full of meaning. Jung called this synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence between internal and external events that have no causal connection, but are united by a deeper sense. For example, you may be reflecting on a personal dilemma, and then you turn on the radio and hear a song that seems to speak directly to you. Or you dream of someone you haven't seen in years, and the next day, that person appears. Jung believed these experiences were signs of the unconscious seeking dialogue with consciousness, small cracks in ordinary life through which the collective unconscious tries to express itself. Another fascinating point is that repressed content does not disappear. It simply shifts, often taking the form of physical symptoms, disproportionate emotions, or existential crises. The symbolic language of the unconscious is powerful, and to ignore it is to ignore a vital part of our nature. Carl Jung argued that the path to true harmony does not lie in repressing the unconscious, but in integrating it. For him, we only achieve a more balanced psyche when we have the courage to look inward, to face our own depths, and to embrace the content we have avoided. This means dealing with both personal wounds and archetypal symbols that belong to the collective unconscious, universal images that repeat themselves in myths, religions, and fairy tales throughout the world. When we begin to recognize and engage with these hidden parts, we open space for transformation. Consciousness expands, the ego becomes more flexible, and identity grows more authentic and complete. In this way, inner conflict gives way to a new state of psychological wholeness. Not perfect, but profoundly human. This is why so many people live in conflict with themselves, because they do not truly know themselves. And only when we are willing to make this inner journey can we truly find peace, meaning, and a deeper alignment with the mystery of existence. Individuation, therefore, is much more than a psychological process. It is a journey of existential transformation. Its goal is not to shape the individual into an external ideal, but to reveal their most authentic essence. Along this path, the aim is not to eliminate conflict, but to understand it as a fundamental part of the human experience. Suffering, paradoxes, and inner tensions cease to be obstacles and become gateways for growth. As the unconscious content is integrated into consciousness, the individual begins to free themselves from superficial identifications, social masks, and conditionings that once governed their choices. They begin to act with greater autonomy, intuition, and clarity. Life takes on a new meaning, less tied to external expectations and more connected to inner truth. This process is deeply symbolic and unfolds gradually. Dreams often serve as maps of the unconscious, bringing images that reflect where we are in this journey. Often, it is through a recurring symbol, a dream conflict, or an archetypal figure that the unconscious manifests, offering consciousness an opportunity for listening and integration. Beyond dreams, practices such as meditation, contemplative silence, spontaneous art, and reflective writing prove to be powerful tools along the way. They function as bridges between the deeper levels of the psyche and the conscious world. The study of mythology and symbolic tales, in turn, helps us recognize that our individual experiences are part of greater narratives, ones shared by all of humanity since ancient times. Integrating the unconscious promotes psychological health and social stability. The individual becomes more self-aware, capable of dealing with their inner dilemmas. Society, by recognizing its own archetypes and collective patterns, becomes more balanced and resilient. Throughout this journey, we discover that true wholeness does not lie in being perfect, but in being complete, in accepting light and shadow, feminine and masculine, ego and self as legitimate parts of who we are. And in this meeting with oneself, the freedom to live with more truth, more presence, and more meaning is born.